We are at a crossroads in the city, and as cliche as it sounds, we can either look forward and really practice some diversity, or we can wait for the good old days to come back. And I worry that waiting will not get us where we need to be. So we really need people who live here to champion the types of initiatives that we're taking on that allows us to be Calgary into the future.
I'm John Lewis, and you're listening to 360 Degree City, a podcast where we talk to all kinds of folks that are making life in cities better. Our hope is at the end of each episode, you'll start to see your own city from a slightly different angle. How we build our city is always going to be intertwined with politics. This episode is the first of two episodes where I talk to urbanists who have become politicians. Today, I talk to Jyoti Gondek.
I am Jyoti Gondek. I am the Ward 3 City Councillor at the City of Calgary.
Jyoti has her PhD in urban sociology. She was elected as the Ward 3 City Councillor during Calgary's municipal election in the fall of 2017. For some context, the City of Calgary is split into 14 wards. Ward 3 is located in north central Calgary. It takes about 20 to 55 minutes to drive from the ward's recreation centre to downtown Calgary, depending on traffic. From the same rec centre, it takes about 10 minutes to drive to the Calgary airport. There are almost 70,000 people living in Ward 3, and the communities are suburban and primarily residential, with single detached homes taking up on average about 70% of the dwellings. Ward 3 is a relatively new part of the city. The oldest communities were built in the 1960s and 1970s, and newer communities are being developed right now. One of the main issues in Ward 3 is a lack of infrastructure. Current plans for Calgary's latest train route, the Green Line, does not yet reach as far north as Ward 3. In addition, the communities in the ward also lack facilities like rec centers, and for example, the rec center I was talking about, which is called Vivo, is currently over capacity. And these are all issues that Councillor Gondek is working to fix. Jyoti is one of many city councillors in Calgary with an educational background in urbanism. As a result, she has an informed perspective on many urban political issues. In this episode, I talked to Jyoti about what it's like as a non-partisan centrist on council, the need for investment in suburban communities, her campaign experience, and the benefits and risks of having multiple urbanists on council. All right, so you took an interesting route to becoming a councillor. Can you briefly tell us about that journey of how you ended up to this spot today?
Yeah, it was not pre-planned. I actually did not have an interest in politics in general. I followed it. I wasn't actively engaged until about 2007, where I participated in a campaign. And it was to sort of understand what municipal politics was about and to help out the gentleman that ultimately won the election that year. And I was hooked. I thought it was pretty interesting. I'd never understood the implications of municipal decision making until I got involved. And so I started to take a greater interest after that. Realized that cities were incredibly complicated places. Decided that I wanted to get a PhD trying to understand that. So I went back and got a degree in urban sociology. And as part of that, I began consulting with land developers in and around Calgary and realized that things were even more complex and complicated than I thought.
Right.
And in 2012, I was accepted to be a member of the Calgary Planning Commission. So the first sociologist ever on that commission.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
So there's a couple of councillors that took a chance on me and thought it would be an interesting perspective to have on board. And that's where I really began to understand that my passion lies in understanding how people intersect with place. And so here we are. After that experience and after working at the Centre for Real Estate Studies at the University of Calgary, I thought, I'll give this a shot. And I won. And here I am.
Awesome. We're on that journey. Were there any particular insights or moments where you said, "Okay, I need to run"?
There was a few times where I thought I need to do something. There was points where I was reading a lot of material on what urban means versus what suburban means, and I realized that we tend to categorize things because we want to be able to put people and things into categories, and rather than trying to understand the gray areas, it's easier to work within something that's known. But the world is full of gray areas, spatially, theoretically, all over. And so I kept getting myself involved in trying to debunk this desire to be sort of polarizing what a suburban community looks like and what an urban community looks like. And so I really began to push the limits on what could be done in my own neck of the woods and how we could sensitively retrofit areas in Ward 3 to be more conducive to walkability, providing gathering places, just to make it a more cohesive and complete neighborhood. And in doing those kinds of things, I noticed that our neighborhood recreation center, Vivo, had not gotten some funding dollars that it desperately needed for expansion. I volunteered to be on their board, and I understood the implications of not expanding that facility. And it didn't just mean that we had to function with a smaller pool and a smaller fitness center. It meant that people couldn't book the facility to gather, and they couldn't have meetings there. They couldn't book their kids' birthday parties there. People couldn't host Christmas parties or AGMs there. And then I started delving into this whole idea of this place being a social hub and bringing people together. And then, even more recently, I started to realize that without a public high school in our ward, that was acting as a de facto social gathering spot for a lot of the teens that couldn't participate in after-school programs because their school was so far away from their community. So it's just this evolving understanding that by not investing in infrastructure in some of our neighborhoods, we're actually making them worse and worse places to live in. And so I think it was a culmination of all those things that said, you keep trying to push for change from the outside and you're meeting limited success. Why not just run and see if you can change the decision-making model on the inside?
And I think the idea of not positioning urban issues into an either-or category, I think, is really necessary. I don't know if you've read this book called The Opposable Mind by Roger Martin.
I have not.
It's really compelling in the way it's more business focused than, say, urbanism.
Yeah.
But what it does is it says the most successful people, the most successful ideas are able to hold seemingly competing ideas in tension and to work with that instead of saying, well, that's suburban or that's urban.
Exactly.
And just move from that. So I appreciate the perspective that you're bringing to your ward, which in sort of probably a lazy way would be, it's just a suburban community. It doesn't need walkability. It doesn't need those things. That's just the way it is.
All day long. I hear that all of the time. Let's stop focusing on the greenfield in suburban communities and let's start talking about really great placemaking in the downtown. Well, let's start talking about really great placemaking in the communities that we developed in the 70s and 80s to be single use only. So let's fix the mistakes of the past and not just shut the door on them. It is really easy to ignore the people that live on the periphery, and it's even easier to label them as, people who don't care. Frankly, a lot of people live there, including myself, because that's where I could afford to live. It doesn't make me any less of a Calgarian, and it doesn't mean that I care any less about this city. I care a lot. And I care so much, I'm looking for infrastructure investment back in that area so we can complete the community that we started out there.
And interesting, we're talking about infrastructure as construction sounds are out the window.
Yes, exactly.
So could you describe, if you can, what a regular workday looks like for a councillor?
Wow. You know what?
Is there such a thing?
There is no such thing. So let's maybe talk about an average week, if we can.
Sure.
So in an average week, I would say you've probably got either a council meeting or a public hearing. And that generally involves a full day, if not spill over into 2 days. You've usually got 1 or 2 committee meetings sprinkled in there as well. And you've got any smattering of other meetings with members of administration, other members of council or their teams, residents with concerns, private sector that interacts with the city to practice city building, just a lot of people and a lot of meetings. And at the same time, you've got to fit in phone calls to residents who only want to talk to you. They don't want to talk to your staff. You've got to find time to respond to emails, and you get hundreds of them every day. But more importantly than that, and this is, I think, one of the toughest things for me, I like to write, and I do my own writing. So I don't have a comms team that writes my stuff for me. That's just something I do, because nobody can get in my head and think the way I do. Probably a scary place in there, too. So I like to be able to get my thoughts out on paper And I like to be able to post them where I can so I can share my reflections with people. In particular, I like to be able to talk about how I'm considering an item that's coming forward or why I voted the way that I did. I think that's really important for residents to know, because we're not always going to agree on everything. And there's a tendency to look at the little sheet that says who voted for and who voted against and make some pretty broad generalizations. I'd like for people to think a little bit deeper than that. So the one thing I really miss is being able to take that time to write my thoughts down. It's rare that I get that opportunity anymore. And it's probably the thing that gives me the most anxiety as well. Knowing that I'm sitting in a council meeting making important decisions, but in the back of my head it's nagging at me that I've got to get back to 3 residents who have asked me a question. And when am I going to find the time to do that?
Yeah. Okay. And I notice I've seen some when you have had the chance. I think it's I love it when you get the chance, not even as one of your ward residents, that you articulate so clearly why it is that a decision was made. So even if, and I think generally in city building, even if someone disagrees with you, they understand why, like you say, instead of just the checkbox, because you may have 7 different councillors voting one way for something, and you could have 5 different reasons for it, so you have no idea. Yeah, and I think it's particularly, just for context, the municipal politics in Calgary doesn't have any party affiliations, so the opinion or the view or the decision-making structure of an individual councillor is that much more important because it leans on them. Yeah.
Well, and particularly when you are actually a centrist, like I am, it's a dirty word to say you're a centrist, because people presume that you're sitting on the fence. And anybody that knows me knows I have no love of sitting on fences. I'm happy to take a position, happy to take a perspective. And when I do my homework and I make a decision, it's always rooted in a perspective that's informed. And so I have no problem making a decision based on something I believe in. Sometimes it'll be viewed as being too left. Other times it'll be viewed as being too right. And people want to label you. Like I said, people want you to be in a box so that they can decide whether they want to engage with you or not. And when you surprise them by voting a way that's different from what they predicted, they don't know what to do with you. And I find myself in that position quite often.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. So you said, you might be in a council meeting and you have these nagging 3 phone calls you want to make. One of the things I'm always intrigued to speak with elected officials about is I know that you get the pothole phone call and those kinds of things. And the reality of many residents is the day-to-day life in the city. Those are the things they want you to address, and that's part of your responsibility.
Yeah.
But you also have decisions that council makes today will have implications for 50, 100 years.
Yes.
For things that you build and don't build.
Yep.
There's examples of that all over the world. How do you balance the immediate stressors and things that residents need to they're concerned about, and those big picture responsibilities that not as many people will be thinking of in terms of front of mind issues?
It's not easy, and I think one of the most important things you need to do is surround yourself with a really good team. You need to have people in place that you can trust implicitly, and you need to build their awareness and confidence of the fact that they're speaking on your behalf. And you need to support them in that. So I've had instances where people will phone or email and say, it better not be an assistant that I'm going to hear back from. And so what I've done on those occasions is either phoned back or written an email and said, please understand that if it is my assistant that reaches out to you in the future, it's certainly not meant to be disrespectful. It's in fact being respectful of your time. Because if you wait for me, it will be a very long time until I can get back to you. So just really building that bridge and explaining to your residents that it's not intended to be something other than talking to me. It's just somebody speaking on behalf of me.
Right.
So letting your staff run with the things that they can. And when it comes to the big picture stuff, I think it's absolutely critical that you have a very clear vision of what it is you stand for and what you want your city to be. And where does your ward play a role in that? Because if you come at it from an extremely ward-centric point of view, you'll have a very difficult time making decisions on council. because much of what we deal with is bigger than just our ward. That's not to say that you can't shape your arguments around positive things for your ward. Really good example right now, we're discussing growth strategy and how should the city grow and what are the areas that should be advanced for growth. And my argument has been we need to set some very clear criteria on why your case would be advanced. And when it is advanced, we need to come up with the funding and financing models to make it work. And what that means for me is if the criteria is set right, my ward will benefit. And my ward will benefit because we've been overlooked for infrastructure investment for decades. We don't have a public high school. We have not had an expansion of our rec facility. We don't have the green line. There's so many things that we're missing. And I really believe because we are at the north central tip of Calgary, we're the gateway to the north and to the airport and to the logistics facilities that are out in Rocky View County. There's huge opportunity, but I need the city to be able to advance the business cases for that. So it is self-interested, but from a very objective point of view.
For sure. And I think that's one of the things, the combination of what you spoke to earlier of doing your homework and basing things on facts and actually having clear decision-making criteria for an individual councillor or for a city as it grows. I think that's really critical because it seems, because then you can be consistent, and arbitrary decision making is one of the things that drives most folks crazy in city building, I think, in general.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
And being able to voice that too, like why you make the decisions you do, because then I think people begin to understand that you've got a thought process and a pattern to the way you make your decisions, and it allows them to maybe make some assumptions before you actually vote on what you might be doing.
For sure.
Gives them some certainty.
And I think that entire process, that entire process it's slow, and you'll see dividends down the road, but what it does is it creates more informed citizens as well.
Yeah.
Instead of they vote right, they vote left, full stop. That's the amount of depth we get in our city building, which obviously doesn't serve anybody over the long term. Yeah.
But you know where that's really ripe is on social media. On social media, people don't want to get into a giant discussion with you.
Yeah.
They want to take either an image of you or how you voted on a particular item or one comment that you made, and they want to be able to take all of that completely outside of the context within which it belongs and be able to weigh in.
Right.
And they want to weigh in with a quick, terse little comment, either in favor of something you did or against it. And they don't do their homework, and they don't look at the context, and they don't look at the bigger picture. And you've really got to refrain from getting into too much of an engaged battle with people because there's other work to be done. Yeah,
absolutely. And I wanted to talk to you about social media. And in your campaign, you knocked on thousands of doors and spoke to thousands of people.
Yeah.
What was the difference you observed from those conversations you might have at someone's front door or at a mall or on the sidewalk versus the nonsense that happens sometimes in social media?
Well, it's really interesting because with social media and with print advertising and even with a website, you have to be very calculated in your approach. And that's not a negative thing because you've only got that ability to reach somebody, in that instant.
For sure.
But that hangs around forever. Like people will go back and look at what you said.
Yeah.
And so, my team had to think very carefully about what do we present? What do we advance? And it was interesting to me because one of the biggest comments I got from my own team was, maybe we don't really push the fact that you're so educated. And I thought, okay, that's interesting to me. And the comment back was, nobody wants to vote for someone who is, trying to be smarter than everyone else. And so it was interesting because my having a PhD may be perceived by some people as me, espousing that I'm smarter than them. When in fact, all it's intended to do is say I'm capable to do this job.
Right.
So we really toned down the education side of it and all of the print media and, anywhere where I couldn't actually speak. What I loved was being able to talk to somebody either, at the grocery store or at the rec center or at their door, have them ask me some questions. And then they would always say, oh, wow, you seem to know this stuff. Do you have a degree in this? And then I could say, well, yeah, I do, actually. Got a couple. Or they would say, oh, well, when I looked at your website, I didn't think you would be this person. So, oh, okay, why not? And then we could talk about their perceptions.
Right.
And we could talk about their issues. And I think the most important thing is, even if I did have somebody at the door that was very angry, and I had a few of those people,
Yeah.
and, fingers being jabbed at me and just people that are mad, it always boiled down to something other than what they were upset about. And, it generally boiled down to a couple of very basic things. They had lost their job, or they were worried about losing their job, or some harm had come to somebody in their family in some way. And if you can get down to that very root of what's bothering them, that's being masked with some sort of a campaign issue, you could have a real live conversation. And that's what I thoroughly enjoyed. You may not agree with me was what I said to everybody, but I will always tell you why I did what I did. And I will always listen to your perspective. I may not agree with you either. So sometimes I'm not going to vote the way you want me to, but ultimately I'm looking out for the good of the community. You can't do that in a Twitter exchange. You can't do that on Facebook, no matter how hard you try. So, I use Facebook sparingly even now to try to communicate complex items to people. I don't engage in the comments if I can help it, because I don't find it conducive to getting my job done. Although I do still love Twitter, because I can bang out what I need to say in 140 characters and be done with it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that experience is really reflective of some of the work we've done in engagement, where we really try and steer everything we can to real conversations with real human beings, because you can it just the way it works, you can be much more you can respectfully disagree much more easily than on social media. It's the respectful part just goes out the window, and it's just disagree and
it does.
A total monster.
But you know what, I gotta tell you, one thing I've been really happy about, and this is something that we're actively trying to do as members of council, I'll challenge somebody who's one of my council colleagues, and I'll say, respectfully, I get where you're coming from, but I completely disagree for this reason.
For sure.
And we've done that on Twitter, and it's been amazing. Councillor George Chahal and I got into it over expansion of the blue line versus the green line. We kept it completely respectful. He made his points, I made mine. And, we sit beside each other. We don't dislike each other. It's not the end of the world. So it can happen. And I think it's healthy for people to see that you can disagree, but be collegial and try to accomplish the same ends for city.
For sure. And that's a good example of modeling behavior that we hope other folks take on. When I was teaching at the university, one of the things I observed was the difficulty students had in challenging us as instructors. They would preface things and they would take a minute to couch what they were going to say to challenge an idea that we were throwing out. And the whole point of university is to challenge each other's ideas. And the same thing with democracy. It's pretty much the same thing. That's the whole point, is to bat these ideas around and make sure the best one comes out.
Oh, exactly. And another big thing too is giving credit where it's due. And, showing respect for your colleagues when they've accomplished something.
For sure.
You may not have won your end of the argument, but if they did something that deserves recognition, you should probably recognize that. And so I'm always happy to say, I'm proud of councillor or whoever it may be for the motion that they brought forward. And also, sometimes to set things straight, if things have gotten heated or busy or crazy on council floor. Really good example of that is we had the very long day on secondary suite reform.
To give you a bit more context about the secondary suite reform that Jyoti just mentioned, secondary suites are an urban planning term for self-contained apartments in a single-family home. Think of a basement suite or a suite on top of a garage. For many years, Calgary's Mayor Naheed Nenshi has been trying to change secondary suite policy. In Calgary, if somebody wants to build a secondary suite, they have to go to a public hearing at City Council for the suite to be approved. Analysis showed that public hearings about secondary suites were taking up about 20% of council meetings. In March of 2018, council voted to change the secondary suite process. Now, redesignation of a property runs through the planning department instead of City Council, making the diversification of Calgary's housing much less onerous.
We had the very long day on secondary suite reform. And at the very end of the meeting, one of the things we managed to do was amend the portion of the bylaw that spoke to backyard suites. And we made it a decision that was comfortable for everybody because many members of council were uncomfortable approving backyard suites as discretionary. They thought they should still come to council for land use approval. And we managed to work together to craft the language that put everybody at ease. It happened to be me that raised that as an amendment, but frankly, it was Councillor Farrell that's been working on that for a very, very long time. So on the floor of council, it appeared that I had made this motion, and I did, but it was led by her vision. And so I had the opportunity to go on Twitter and say, listen, I played a very small role, but ultimately she's the one that crafted this compromise on suites that worked for everybody.
Right.
And we could tell it worked for everybody because I believe it was unanimous. But I did not have an opportunity to say on council floor that she had done this work, but I was able to say it on Twitter.
I saw that.
Yeah,
that's great. And I think that, again, that's one of those things that I'm sure will pay dividends throughout all your terms.
Yep.
Sort of positive snowball of respect, but challenging each other when you don't agree.
Exactly.
Okay, so you talked a bit about your educational background and how that was positioned or not in the election. This particular council, so for context, October of 2017, there was a municipal election in Alberta, municipal elections in Alberta, new council, and there's a number of folks that have an urbanism background on council. Can you speak to how that is a good thing or maybe sometimes a bad thing in terms of representation on council?
I'm going to say it's always a good thing.
All right.
Even though sometimes it feels like a bad thing when we talk a lot, it's actually a good thing because it allows us to get our points across. It allows us to do what we should be doing, and that's trying to convey a position and trying to get other members of council to buy into that position, right? And it sparks a dialogue. So when you've got someone coming from an urban planning background saying, well, if we lay out the community in this manner, this is the positive that we're going to get. Or if they challenge something and say, you're not going to get good form if you do it this way. And then you get the person who's been on the business side of the equation saying, well, in the real estate world, that's not going to work because your pro forma will not support what you're trying to achieve here. And then you got somebody who's on the social side of it saying, but wait, the settlement patterns in the city indicate that this type of built form isn't even appropriate for the type of people that we're probably going to have here. That is amazing. You've gone from talking about built form to talking about the financials and the economy to talking about how people are actually going to interact and engage with it. That is city building at its finest. And to have that discussion and that dialogue at the table, and then it's augmented by people who are able to talk about their experiences in different sectors of the industry or with the arts and entertainment sector, then we're really having a discussion about what Calgary is and could be.
So there was, just looking at some of your previous work and things, there was an article in the Herald from a few years back, and one of the phrases that I appreciate in the article and just your straightforward way of communicating is you said we were immediately struck by the amount of vacant terminology and rhetoric that was being used by urbanistas in all kinds of ways. Is there a risk of that when you have a bunch of urbanistas on council?
There's absolutely a risk of that. But we tend to keep each other in check.
Good. Yeah.
And I think we've got enough people that are, we're pretty down home folk. And we like to say it like it is. So instead of using vagaries like talking about, well, it'll be sensitive densification, we don't have problems saying, if you built this little unit on this lot, you could accomplish this. And, instead of talking about facades and chamfers, we're talking about, well, can you bend the roof a little bit so you're not looking right down into your next door neighbor's yard? We're not afraid to do that.
Yeah.
And I think that comes at a time when it's critical for citizens to be engaged with this council.
For sure.
We are at a crossroads in the city, and as cliche as it sounds, we can either look forward and really practice some diversity, or we can wait for the good old days to come back. And I worry that waiting will not get us where we need to be. So we really need people who live here to champion the types of initiatives that we're taking on that allows us to be Calgary into the future.
Right. I think that's really healthy and probably reflective of the urbanists that are on council. They've chosen to be on council. You know, that's an active choice. So they don't have to represent or stay in the club and protect the language like professions tend to do. So I think that's a really healthy shift that can actually inform the home professions for these folks as well.
Yeah.
Is there anything that folks might not know about being an elected official, a city councillor, that might surprise them?
There's people that feel this is a part-time job that we've inflated into a full-time job, and I get a chuckle out of that because, and I've put this on social media too, I'm usually up at 5:30, sometimes a little bit earlier, depending on what's happening in the day, and I don't know what changes are going to be thrown at me in the course of that day. If I am home by 6, it's a really, really good day. And if I don't have to read anything after getting home at 6, it's an exceptional day. We don't get a lot of days off. I think I can count 1, maybe 2, where I have done nothing work-related since I've been elected. It is a very busy job, and it's necessarily busy. We hold the future of a city in our hands, and we take it very seriously. We've got binders that we read through for public hearing processes. If we don't pay attention to what the public is saying, we're not weighing in appropriately. So it's a massive task. It's a lot of reading. It's a lot of listening. And it's a lot of thinking. And you may look like you're sitting on the couch watching something, you know, unwinding and relaxing. And really what you're tooling around in your mind is, but how will that amendment actually make life better for somebody in Calgary? Or who do I have to talk to make sure that we are doing this the right way? So you're on your toes, you know, figuratively and literally all day long. And you're always on.
Yeah,
you can't have the type of day where someone cuts you off and you give them a grand gesture because everyone knows it's you.
Yeah, right.
So civility at all times.
Yeah, for sure. Is how many pages on average would you say you're asked to read in a week?
Oh my goodness. So this week's an interesting example. We had 934 letters from the public with regard to secondary suites. And then we had the full agenda on top of it. And I don't even know if I could give you pages, but if you had 2 fists stacked, one on top of the other, that's a heavy council day of pages to read. 1 fist is pretty standard.
It's a one-fister this week.
It's a one-fister.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, because that's both the reading and the hours is something that I've been very, I've admired and respected of elected officials, and I think you're all a little bit crazy for doing that in the best way possible, because it's, the amount, you see someone at a marathon council event, and then you see them at a community activity, you know, the next day, and you know that there's some. That's one of the good things of social media is to be able to see, you know, yourself or Councillor Woolley or someone might just show a picture of how many things they have to read in the over the weekend. Usually,
it's usually over the weekend.
Because councils meet on Monday, and
hey, but we knew what we were getting into.
That's right. So last question, something we ask all our guests. Can you tell us a city that you love and why?
The most recent one that I can think of is Quebec City. And I love it because it truly embraces being a winter city. If you go there in the dead of winter, like I did in January of this year, everybody's outside. You've got little babies all bundled up, and, you know, dads are pushing them in the stroller, and you've got women that are out for a run over their lunch break. Everybody's outside. They get it. Yep. They've embraced it. They own it. They are winter. And it's beautiful. Yeah. It's an absolutely beautiful place, and they've really had the great benefit of having some heritage buildings and a rich history that they have preserved over time. They're one of those cities that, you know, own the fact that their history makes them as great as they are. And, you know, the other city that I love, I'll give you 2 instead of 1. I'm sorry, I'm sure everyone does this. It's Calgary. And that sounds cheesy as hell, but I chose to move here. And I moved here because I felt like this place would give me a chance to be me. And it did. You know, it's not some stuffy city. It's not a government city. It actually lets you be creative and think about what it is that you can do to contribute to society. And it helps you find the avenue to execute on that. So I love this place for adopting me and letting me be a Calgarian.
Wonderful. I really appreciate Jyoti's thoughtful, honest, and well-informed approach to decision-making. She also strives to be transparent by constantly sharing her thoughts and messages online, and really models the kind of open dialogue that makes democracies healthy. Get in touch with us if you have a great elected official in your city. We would love to talk to more folks that have chosen public service as a way to make their cities better. 360 Degree City is created by the team at Intelligent Futures. To learn more about the work we do, you can go to intelligentfutures.ca. The music in this episode and in all our episodes is by Sound of Picture. If you like the podcast, please share it with someone that might be interested in seeing their own city from a different angle. We would love it if you subscribed and reviewed the podcast, and would love to hear your feedback. If you have any suggestions for future guests or topics that you'd like us to cover, get in touch with us on our website or any of our social accounts. I'm John Lewis. Thanks for stopping by.